The little cafe had barely opened when the woman in the expensive coat collapsed against the counter, her face suddenly drained of color. For one terrifying moment, nobody moved. Customers stared, the cashier froze, and the woman's trembling hand slipped from the edge of the counter. Then a 23-year-old waitress named Elsie Hartley ran from behind the espresso machine, caught the stranger before she hit the floor, and did something that would change both of their lives forever. Elsie had no idea that the woman she was helping was the mother of one of the most feared men in the city, a woman surrounded by secrets, enemies, and powerful people. She only knew that someone was hurting, and she could not walk away. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing you emotional stories about the goodness that still exists in people. Elsie Hartley had learned early that kindness was not something you practiced only when life was easy. At 23, she was working 6 days a week at a small neighborhood cafe called the Copper Cup, where she earned barely enough to pay rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother, Owen. Their mother had died several years earlier, leaving Elsie with responsibilities she had never expected to carry so young. Owen was still finishing school, and Elsie had quietly become the person who paid the bills, bought groceries, repaired broken things, and pretended not to worry whenever the landlord slipped another notice beneath their door. She was tired most mornings, but she had a stubborn habit of smiling at strangers. Her manager sometimes teased her for giving away pastries at closing time to elderly customers who could not afford them, but Elsie always believed that a person could be poor in money and still be rich enough to give something away. That ordinary morning began with rain clouds gathering over the city, though the streets were still bright beneath the pale afternoon sun. Elsie was carrying a tray of coffee toward a corner table when the elegant woman entered the cafe. She looked completely out of place among the students, office workers, and delivery drivers. Her silver-gray hair was perfectly styled, her cream-colored coat was expensive, and a diamond bracelet rested loosely around her wrist. Yet something about her face immediately caught Elsie's attention. Beneath the elegance was exhaustion. The woman sat alone near the window and asked for tea, but before Elsie could bring it, the woman pressed one hand against her chest and staggered toward the counter. Elsie dropped the tray. She rushed forward just in time, wrapping an arm around the woman's shoulders and guiding her carefully to the floor. Someone called for medical help while another customer stood uselessly nearby, but Elsie stayed focused. She loosened the woman's scarf, kept her calm, and held her hand until the paramedics arrived. The woman was conscious but weak, and when the paramedics prepared to take her outside, she suddenly grabbed Elsie's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were frightened, almost desperate, and she looked at Elsie as though she wanted to say something important but could not find the words. Elsie simply squeezed her hand and told her everything would be all right. She did not know the woman's name. She did not ask for money. She did not take a photograph or try to discover who she was. She only watched until the ambulance disappeared down the street, then returned to work with a strange feeling in her chest. She assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. The following morning, Elsie arrived at the cafe expecting another ordinary shift. She was carrying a box of supplies through the front entrance when 5 black vehicles stopped along the curb almost simultaneously. 5 men in dark suits stepped out. They were broad-shouldered, serious, and perfectly coordinated. Every movement suggested training and discipline. Customers inside the cafe fell silent as the men entered. Elsie's manager immediately looked terrified. One of the men approached Elsie and asked for her by name. She stood completely still. The man explained that they had come because of the woman Elsie had helped the previous day. He said their employer wished to speak with her. Elsie looked at the 5 bodyguards and felt her stomach tighten. She had never been involved with powerful people. She had never even received a parking ticket. Yet 5 intimidating men had arrived specifically for her. The obvious question was why. The answer came when a black sedan pulled up outside, and a man stepped out. He was perhaps in his early 30s, dressed in a dark suit with an expression so controlled that it was difficult to tell what he was feeling. The moment he entered the cafe, the 5 bodyguards moved aside. He looked at Elsie for several seconds before asking whether she was the young woman who had helped his mother. His name was Everett Kane. Elsie knew that name. Everyone in the city did. Everett Kane was rumored to control a vast criminal empire built on illegal gambling, smuggling, protection rackets, and other activities people discussed only in whispers. His name rarely appeared in newspapers, but everyone knew enough to understand that powerful men avoided crossing him. Some called him a businessman. Others called him a criminal. Most people simply avoided saying his name at all. Elsie suddenly understood why the 5 bodyguards were there. She expected anger. She expected threats. Instead, Everett looked almost exhausted. He explained that his mother, Beatrice Kane, had suffered from a serious heart condition and had recently refused to allow anyone outside the family to know how vulnerable she had become. She had gone to the cafe alone because she needed a quiet place away from the constant security surrounding her. When she collapsed, Elsie had saved her from hitting her head and stayed beside her until help arrived. Everett had watched the cafe's security footage. He had seen everything. He had seen Elsie kneeling on the floor beside his mother, using her own sweater to support Beatrice's head. He had seen her refuse the money another customer offered her afterward. He had seen her quietly return to work as if she had done nothing extraordinary. But there was another reason he had come. His mother had asked him to find Elsie. When Elsie finally agreed to visit Beatrice at the hospital during visiting hours, she walked into a private room expecting an intimidating woman surrounded by luxury. Instead, she found Beatrice sitting near the window in a simple robe, looking smaller and more fragile than she had the day before. Beatrice remembered Elsie's face immediately. She reached for her hand. The older woman explained that she had spent most of her life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Money, influence, protection, favors, connections. She had forgotten what genuine kindness looked like. Elsie's help had reminded her. But Beatrice also revealed something painful. Everett's father had built the criminal empire years earlier. After his death, Everett had inherited it. Beatrice had spent years trying to convince her son to leave that world, but every attempt had failed. Everett believed power was the only thing keeping their family alive. Elsie listened quietly. She did not excuse Everett's choices, and she did not pretend she understood his world. She simply told Beatrice that being afraid of losing someone could sometimes make a person hold on to the very thing destroying them. Those words stayed with Beatrice. They stayed with Everett too. Over the next several days, Elsie's life became strangely intertwined with the Kane family. Beatrice insisted on visiting the cafe once she was discharged, but Everett refused to let her travel without protection. 5 bodyguards began appearing whenever Beatrice went anywhere. At first Elsie found the entire situation absurd. The woman who had nearly collapsed beside a coffee machine now had a security team large enough to protect a politician. Yet something unexpected happened. Beatrice began spending time at the cafe. She sat by the window, drank tea, watched Elsie work, and gradually became part of the little community. She learned Owen's name. She remembered the elderly customers. She noticed when Elsie looked tired. For the first time in years, Beatrice experienced something money could not buy, ordinary human connection. Meanwhile, Everett began questioning the life he had inherited. For years, he had believed fear was strength. His organization had been built around obedience, and he had convinced himself that harsh decisions were necessary to protect the people he loved. But watching his mother laugh with cafe customers and seeing Elsie struggle to pay her bills made him realize how far removed he had become from normal life. Then everything changed. One afternoon, Elsie discovered that her younger brother had been threatened outside school. Nobody had touched him, but a stranger had warned him to stay away from the Kane family. Elsie immediately understood that someone was sending a message. She confronted Everett. For the first time, she was furious. She told him that his world had followed her home and placed Owen in danger. She told him that she had helped Beatrice because she was a human being, not because she wanted anything from the Kane family. She told him that kindness should never become a debt someone else was forced to repay. Everett listened without defending himself. He realized she was right. The threat had come from one of his own senior associates, a man named Victor Hale, who believed Everett had become weak. Victor had begun secretly moving against Everett, using fear and violence to create his own power base. The attack on Elsie's brother was meant to frighten Everett into returning to his old ways. Instead, Everett made a different choice. He ordered his security team to protect Elsie and Owen without controlling their lives. Then he began dismantling the criminal operations he had inherited. He contacted lawyers, authorities, and legitimate business partners. He surrendered financial records connected to illegal operations and began cooperating with investigators. It cost him almost everything. People who had feared Everett now called him a traitor. Some of his former associates abandoned him. Others threatened him. His fortune began disappearing as accounts were frozen and properties were seized. For the first time in his adult life, Everett was no longer the most powerful man in the room. And somehow, he felt lighter. Beatrice stood beside him through every difficult day. Elsie did too, but from a distance. She never told him that everything was forgiven. Instead, she told him that forgiveness was not pretending the past had never happened. It was giving someone the opportunity to become better while still remembering what they had done. Months passed. Everett eventually faced legal consequences for his role in the organization. He accepted them without trying to use his influence to escape responsibility. When he came out the other side, his life was completely different. He no longer had an army of men obeying his every command. He had fewer possessions, fewer friends, and almost none of the power he once considered essential. But he had his mother. He had begun rebuilding his relationship with her. And he had something else he had never expected. A place where people knew him not as a feared criminal, but simply as Everett. The Copper Cup became that place. One spring afternoon, almost a year after the day Elsie had saved Beatrice, the cafe was unusually crowded. Elsie was behind the counter when the 5 familiar bodyguards appeared outside. For a second, she froze. Then she smiled. The men were no longer frightening to her. They had become familiar faces in the little cafe. Behind them came Beatrice, walking slowly but confidently with a cane. And beside her was Everett, wearing an ordinary jacket instead of his old tailored suits. Beatrice approached Elsie and placed a small envelope on the counter. Inside was not money. It was the deed to a new community cafe. Everett explained that he had used the remaining legitimate portion of his family's wealth to establish a foundation supporting struggling workers, young people aging out of foster care, and families trying to rebuild after financial hardship. The cafe would be the foundation's first project. Elsie stared at the papers in disbelief. But she refused to accept them for herself. Instead, she suggested turning the cafe into a community business where employees could eventually earn ownership shares. She wanted people who had struggled like her to have opportunities instead of handouts. Everett smiled. That was the moment he understood why his mother had trusted Elsie. She had never wanted his money. She wanted people to have a chance. Years later, the story of the 5 bodyguards became almost funny among the regular customers. Children would point toward the entrance whenever the men arrived and whisper that something important must be happening. The elderly customers would laugh. Beatrice would roll her eyes affectionately. And Everett, once feared by half the city, would quietly carry boxes of pastries from the kitchen to the tables. Nobody who saw him then would have believed the man he had once been. But Elsie understood something that day in the cafe when she had caught Beatrice before she fell. She had not saved a powerful woman. She had simply helped another human being. And sometimes, that is how change begins. Not with wealth. Not with power. Not with revenge. Sometimes it begins with one exhausted person choosing to care about another person's pain. Everett had spent years believing that fear could protect his family. In the end, it was kindness that saved them. Beatrice had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her, and a struggling cafe waitress had reminded her that genuine compassion could come from someone who had almost nothing. Elsie had believed she was simply helping a stranger, never imagining that her smallest act of kindness would inspire an entire family to choose a different future. Before we reach the final moment of this story, leave a meaningful comment and tell us what you believe Elsie's greatest gift was: her courage, her compassion, or her ability to forgive without forgetting the past. Your answer may inspire someone else who is struggling today. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because the most powerful lesson Elsie ever taught Everett was simple: you never know how much darkness a single act of kindness can illuminate. She had walked into work one ordinary morning with tired eyes, an empty wallet, and no idea that she was about to change the life of a woman she had never met. The next morning, 5 bodyguards had come for her. She had feared they were there because she was in trouble. Instead, they became the unexpected witnesses to a transformation that proved something the world often forgets. A person does not need power to change a life. Sometimes all they need is the courage to help someone who has fallen. And sometimes, the person you stop to save becomes the reason you discover that your own life can be changed too.